Hello and welcome to Essex by the Sea. I'm Owen Ward, exploring the Essex coast, finding out about the amazing and interesting stories it has to offer. For this episode, I'm actually finding out about an alternative podcast that you might like and enjoy. It's certainly one I've been enjoying and listening to, and it started around about the same sort of time that Essex by the Sea started. But this one is slightly different because there's no speech in it. Here's a little snippet. The sounds there from Burnham on Crouch. The people who recorded that is Madeleine and Hugh, who join me now. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks ever so much for joining me. You've recorded these brilliant soundscapes and you've been uploading them to let people listen to it. I suppose we better give a mention to the channel, Radio Lento. Is that how I'm pronouncing it?
Yeah, exactly right.
So these, first of all, these soundscapes, there's no speech. Why are you wanting to record essentially nothing?
Well, one of the reasons is because when we go out and enjoy the countryside and the coastal paths and things, you know that feeling you get when you just get away from it all and all you hear is the sounds of wildlife and just the wind in the grass and just the sound of the sea. These are the feelings that we really love, that you get through sound. And just like you take photographs of beautiful places that you go to when you're on a lovely walk or something, or on a holiday, we record photographs in sound instead. And the beauty of it is that you can, with a pair of headphones, put those headphones on and then just listen to the sound of the ambience of that place again. And we know that we love it. We love that feeling that you get. And you can just think, read, draw. Maybe you can work, or you can just lie on the sofa and drift off to those sounds and imagine them in your head.
And I jokingly kind of said there that you're recording nothing, but actually there's a lot of sounds that your microphones pick up. Let's go all the way back to the beginning though, and you actually started this during the coronavirus lockdowns, I believe. Why did you want to record those sounds in the first place?
We've been recording for a long time, really. We've been building up the archive of soundscapes that we've been collecting, and it really felt that lockdown was the right time to share them. We'd been planning and thinking about this idea for a long time, but the day job and the kids and stuff have got in the way, and then lockdown was the perfect time when we actually had some time to sit and actually do something about it. And at the time when we thought that people would find it beneficial to hear different places that they couldn't get to.
And actually, it was very helpful for people, particularly during lockdown, that period where we weren't able to get away. You were using it as part of your daily exercise, I believe, and actually getting out and sort of stretching the legs along the coast. And many are recorded along the Essex coast, not all of them. You visited other places as well. What draws you back to Essex, though?
It's been so wonderful having a reason to go out and explore new places, because we get to everywhere that we record by train because we don't have a car, and we live in London, and so we look at the train lines and look at where might be a quiet place to go to, and it's made us go to places that we never would have gone to otherwise, in just the search for interesting sound and the search for quiet. And I feel like we've discovered so many hidden corners that we'd never really heard of before. It's been such an adventure, and we've loved having a way to share it with other people as well and helping them to think about those places that they might like to visit themselves.
I must admit, you have gone to some very obscure corners and little coves around the Essex coast. It's famed for so many of its little gems, but they are some obscure places. I'm thinking one particular place, because I think actually some of the very first publicity I did for Essex by the Sea was on a very, very small beach at Stamford-le-Hope. You've got the Mucking Nature Reserve, which used to be a tip to one side. You've got the London Gateway Port to another, and you've got this tiny little bit of sand and mud when the tide's, it's mostly mud to be fair, once the tide is out, and you find these little gems. And I guess actually when you're recording these sounds, it must be just very nice to be enjoying those remote places that you find.
Oh, totally. I remember that recording session so well because we carried the microphones and the kit box, the sort of wooden box we've made to make it weatherproof. I remember it rattling in our rucksacks as we were walking over that nature reserve, and we had no idea if we'd find anywhere to record because, as you say, there's the container port nearby. And it's nice to listen to a container port, if you've got that sort of industrial head on, but we did want to get away from it all. And the beauty of that place is that you can actually suddenly turn a corner, drop down to, the shoreline by the Thames, and somehow find a little oasis of perfect quiet, which is why we'd always say, what we hope our podcast can do, and yours too, is help all of us realise that it's worth going out for a walk. You can almost always find some peace and quiet. We find it. We don't really go to ridiculous lengths to get these sound recordings. We have 2 kids. We go on the train. We carry our microphones. And what we've captured in our podcast and these beautiful soundscapes, almost all of them you can reach yourself just in a day, just going out on a day's walk. They're not hard to reach. And on that day, we dropped down onto the beach at Sanford-le-Hope. The water was just lapping, tide was going out. There were just a few kids playing a bit further down on the sandy beach, which we never thought we'd find there. And it was bliss. And we made a cup of tea on a stove, and we just put the mics out just far enough away from us so you can't hear us, and just recorded the sound. And it's bliss. It's just lovely.
Sitting alongside a container port perhaps isn't always described as bliss, but I know what you're meaning with that little stretch of the coast here in Essex. Before we come on to sort of actually how you do the recording, you hinted a little bit there as to some of the kit that you use. But first of all, I wanted to ask really, what's been the most enjoyable part of the coast to record? Has there been one standout moment that's you've gone, actually, yeah, that's a really good place and a really good recording that we got?
I think we have a difference of opinion.
Yeah.
We were just saying, I really loved when we went to Rabness and just getting on the little branch line train from Manningtree and going along that bit of the stretch of estuary and then coming off the train and walking down the little path and getting to the water with the lovely houses on stilts. And then as the people kind of peeled away and there was nobody left, that was a real special place. And we saw sand martins dashing and running, flying in and out of the cliffs. Just a really special place on a perfect day. I think that was one of my favourites.
Yeah, I was just thinking because I loved that. It was wonderful. I think for me, it was walking that coastal path, Bradwell on Sea. There's an ancient chapel along that coast, and we walked from there and found these old concrete barges, which are sea defences. And it was just so quiet. It was just fantastic. And we stopped, put the microphones. I sat with them because the tide was coming in, and we were actually a bit worried that the stuff would get washed away because we record very close, sort of really close up to the action of if we're recording the sea, we will get right down into the rock pools and record really close. So you get that feeling as if you're sitting yourself on a rock listening to the tide coming in. I think for me that was the most spellbinding time, just sitting there on the rock, making sure the mics didn't get washed away. And I loved that place.
And there are places that we have been to but didn't make a recording at. So we did a trip recently where we got the branch line from along the Crouch and got off at Southminster. And it was the stillest day. There was no wind. And that bit of the end of the Dengie Peninsula, there's no traffic, there's no cars. And it was the quietest place I think we'd been to for years. But actually there was no sound that day, so we couldn't record. But we intend to go back on a day where there's a bit more action going on and maybe a different time of the year, so there are a few more birds around, and go back and do a recording there, because that felt like a place that we needed to explore a bit more.
Let's hear a little bit then of that episode, the water coming in across those sunken barges there on the coast. You mentioned about being right up close to the action, as it were, in the recordings and the soundscapes. How do you record it? You mentioned a little box that you've made to keep the equipment waterproof, but what do you use in terms of recording equipment for this?
Well, we use a sort of semi-professional field recorder. It does a really good job of recording very quiet sounds. You know, it's very sensitive. The thing we have kind of gone slightly off-piste on is the type of microphones we use. We use a type of microphone that's actually designed for wildlife recording. So they're very sensitive microphones. The problem with them is they're very sensitive to wind. So they can pick up, say, a curlew hundreds of meters away. They can also pick up the sound of wind wisping through the grass, which is why we use this sort of microphone. It's a bit like a sort of a telephoto lens. You know, it can pick up sounds at quite a long distance. But the way we set them up is, instead of pointing them at specific things, like pointing them at a bird or pointing them at a tree with the wind blowing through it, which most sound recorders do, we use a pair of microphones spaced just like your ears. And we've built a box that's effectively works a bit like a dummy head. And the idea of that is that you get this 3D surround sound effect, because we record in 2-channel sound, left and right ear. So when you put your headphones on, what you're actually experiencing is something almost exactly the same as if you were sitting there on that rock yourself. And that's the feeling we want to put across in our podcast. It's this feeling of being there yourself, which is why we say put the outside on with headphones.
Absolutely, and it is best listened to in the headphones, because you really do then get a feeling that you're right there. You're right where in the location, and also if you close your eyes and know the location, you can effectively picture exactly where you are doing the recording, which is something quite magical, really.
That's the experience we want you to have. We want you to put the headphones on and feel like you're there. And I think because often we've left the microphones recording without us there either. So the place is the sound just of the place. We're not there to influence the sound of it. You know, the birds have all come back. The people are going past are just talking if there are people around. You know, there's no sense of us in it. So it is just like you're there.
Mm-hmm. Have you, talking of people going past, have you had people sort of come up and sort of look at you a little bit weirdly and go, what's in the box?
No, we never have, and that's because we're really good at camouflaging the box. And the other technique we use is we record off the path. So, you know, we're recording before Christmas at Benfleet, and we walk down off the path, the one that leads from Benfleet to Leigh-on-Sea, and we walked down to the mud, and then we sort of took a bit of a risk and walked out as far on the mud as we could before we started to sort of sink into it. And then we actually used a tripod. We had our recording equipment on top of the tripod, and we literally just squelched it into the mud and then retired back up the slope and went off and sat beneath some cover so that we wouldn't, if we were talking, it wouldn't come out on the mics. And we couldn't see the mics anymore, but they did pick up people shouting to their dogs, for example, when they're walking along the coastal path. You can't actually hear what people say because we take care to position the microphones sufficiently far away from people that you wouldn't be able to pick up conversations. But you do get that really sort of nice weekend feel of people calling their dogs and just a bit of distant sound, so that when you're listening back, the podcast is there. It's almost like, well, that's just what the world was like on that day. It's just like going out for a country walk. We don't pretty it up. We don't do anything to the soundscape to make it artificial like you get on other podcasts or other sort of nature sounds. These sounds we produce, we take a lot of trouble to make sure they're fully authentic, and it is the sound of that place and time passing in it, and it's authentic and real. We think that's one of the main things about what we're doing, that it is the real place. It's what it really sounds like. We haven't layered it or done any clever editing or anything to add anything in to improve it. It's just nice and real and honest.
And the extreme version of that is where we've left the microphones overnight. So we find a good place for them, and because we've camouflaged the kit enough, they can't, no animal or bird or person will be able to see a light shining out of it or anything like that. So it can just blend into the background. So we leave it overnight sometimes, and those are the recordings that are kind of all the more special because you get the transition of the night passing. And I've never sat in a field at night and heard what the sound is like, so it feels like an even more intense experience and view into what actually happens in those spaces that we don't inhabit ourselves.
Fascinating to get your insight into what goes on. Other than accessibility by train, do you plan where you're going to do the recordings? Other than that, is it that you look for that remoteness? And have you considered doing ones that are a bit more sort of urbanised, I guess, if that's even a word?
I think it is a word. I do a lot of planning. I'm the chief location scout, so I'm looking at the train timetables and looking at the OS maps, and then looking at I use something called plotter route to help me work out how far that we're going to be able to walk, be able to get to the point. Usually it's a halfway point in a walk where we'll do the recording, so it's far enough away from the station and cars and roads and people. So there's a lot of planning and thinking, but sometimes it's a bit spontaneous. Oh, where should we go tomorrow? But we've kind of got a mental list of all the places that we still want to go to, or places we want to go back to. And we don't just do Essex. So even out of the 106 episodes, we go to Hertfordshire, Kent quite a lot. But Essex is the easiest for us to get to, and because it's the end of the country, there aren't as many roads that are kind of passing, so we've got more chance of finding places which don't have road noise, because road noise is the killer of our sound recording, because we just don't want to have the sound of road noise in to interrupt the nice sounds that there are. But saying that, we have done urban ones. So we were in Birmingham last summer, and we were so keen to be here and do some recording, but everywhere is roads here. So we thought, well, if we can't beat them, join them. So we went and stood underneath Spaghetti Junction and made a recording under there just to do an ultimate road soundscape. And it was really interesting because we found a tunnel and the sound was overhead, but it was distant enough not to sound awful. And it was it sounded quite sea-like itself, didn't it?
Yeah, it does. Often roads do have a kind of sea-like sound to them. We don't do very many of those. So anyone thinking of listening and just think, oh, I don't really want to listen to the sound of roads. If you do, where roads do appear in our podcast, they appear because we've managed to capture something really unusual. Hardly anyone gets to stand right underneath Spaghetti Junction, one of the country's busiest roads, and then under a sort of ancient Victorian canal tunnel with this really strange hole in the roof where daylight's coming in to this really long tunnel, and then sound is coming in from one end of the tunnel and the other end of the tunnel and down from this hole in the ceiling. And then people are just walking through the tunnel or cycling through. So it's actually a really interesting mixture of crazy, tumultuous noise of cars, but far away, and then just beautifully delicate sounds of a bicycle going past with its tyres on the gravel. And it's just such a lovely sort of textural difference. So we are sort of we are very like photographers in a way. We're really looking with our high sensitivity microphones and spatial recording techniques to paint with authentic sound these really beautiful soundscapes, which are, as I say, they're all real. We don't fiddle with them, we don't enhance them. They're just natural, and we think they work better that way.
Final question from me then. In terms of your listeners who download the episodes every time you release one, what's the feedback been like from them?
It's been amazing. I think at the start we needed to kind of explain about it and tell people what it's for, because it is so different to all podcasts that are out there. But I think through lockdown, people needed that escape, and so people tried new things. And now we get feedback from people saying that they use us to help get to sleep at night. People listen to us while they're working. We've had people saying that they've been writing a book about the sea, and then they use certain seascape episodes to work to, because it helps them to get into the space more, or people that are writing about birds and they want to hear the birds at the same time to give them the sense of what they're writing about. And people who use it through fireworks season to calm their pets, which I loved. People who use it to help their babies get to sleep or get their children to go to sleep. People with tinnitus, people who are having chemotherapy who sit and want to escape somewhere. I just feel like there are so many different reasons and ways that people could use the soundscapes, and I use them myself. So when I'm working out, and I have to find the one that fits my mood, so I don't always listen to the same one each time. Some days I might feel like I want to listen to birds, and next day I want to listen to the sea. It's just an adventure each time, and I think I feel really proud that we've made something which captures these moments and allows them to be listened to by anybody.
Yeah, I love the feedback we've had where people have said things like the rain recordings we've made have been really different to the ones that you can get on other well-known streaming platforms. And we do aim to make sure that what we're producing is a completely different level of sound quality. And also, we don't use loops. So if you listen to sort of 35 or 45 minutes of rain that we've recorded, it is literally pure and uninterrupted. It's how the rain really fell. And because we record in stereo spatial sound, it's all around you, and you can really enjoy the beauty of these just natural phenomenon from the comfort of wherever you're sitting with your headphones on. You don't have to get wet to listen to it, but you can hear it because the microphone box was out in the rain. So it's like being there yourself but not having to get wet. And we know that people really like that. So we do as much of that as we can.
To finish, we'll hear another snippet of one of your episodes. But before that, where can people find your podcasts, and where can they enjoy these soundscapes from?
You can go to Radio Lento Podcast and just type that into the search box on your podcast app. Radio Lento is Lento. You can also go to radiolento.podbean.com if you want to listen via a website. So if you haven't got a smartphone, or if you haven't got podcast app or you don't want to use one, you can just go to the website version. There's a player on there, and you can also read the text, because we write very carefully about each episode so that when you read it you can really understand what you're listening to. And that's all there on the website as well. Any of the main streaming platforms as well, just type Radio Lento Podcast and you'll be able to find us on any of the main streaming platforms as well.
And we're also on Twitter at Radio Lento, which is where you can see photographs and some behind-the-scenes stories about the places that we go to, which we share a lot to, and other people's interesting observations about nature. I feel like we've learnt lots of new things from the podcast community through Twitter as well.
Madeleine and Hugh from Radio Lento, thank you ever so much for joining me here on Essex by the Sea.
Thank you.
It's been fab, thanks.